I'm going to travel back in time a little bit with some of you. How many of you remember the kids' cartoon Tom and Jerry? Anybody here? Even most of the adults remember Tom and Jerry. Reruns, now my kids have gotten introduced to it. And I remember one of the cartoons when I was young, and it was a play on Moby Dick. Do you remember the book Moby Dick, the white whale? And I remember that this Tom and Jerry cartoon had the character who was the captain, Ahab, and he was searching for Dickie Moe. That was what they called the white whale. And the captain was consumed with getting the white whale. Absolutely consumed. His entire life, his entire being was consumed with trying to get Dickie Moe. And of course, Tom and Jerry play into it, and they have their little antics and everything else, and it's kind of funny going along. But the end of the show ends with the captain trying to spear the white whale, and if I remember correctly, he gets caught up in the ropes along with Tom, and they both end up tied to the white whale, and the white whale goes off into the sunset, carrying them away. Their obsession had led them basically to their deaths, being so consumed with the white whale. Any of you remember that episode? Am I the only one who does? Oh my. I hope I'm telling it right. But I thought about that episode as I thought about this morning, and I thought about what Jesus says in the gospel lesson about being free. Because we like to think that we're free. We have this sense of being Americans and having the ability and autonomy to go do what we want and participate in the things that we want to participate in and be allowed to do whatever we want. And so we think we're free. And on one level, I guess, when it comes to making our choices, we are free, but on another level, you know we're not, right? I mean, when you get in a car and start driving down the road, are you really free? Are you? Try driving on the left-hand side of the road. How long is that going to last? Try driving 90 miles an hour in front of a state trooper. We're not totally free in that. And so, because we have these laws and stuff like that, we're not totally free in our nation, so how in the world can we be free? And is there another type of freedom? Is there another type of bondage that we are actually in? And you see, when Jesus came up and he told his disciples and he told the Jews that had followed him, that if you continue in my word, you are truly my disciples, you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. The early Jewish folks said, we are already free. They were forgetful of that they had been slaves at one time. They said, we've never been enslaved to anybody. What do you mean we'll be free? And they forgot their history. They forgot that they had been captives and slaves in Egypt. They were so consumed by the illusion of freedom. And then they forgot that they were subject to the Roman Empire at that time. And so, they were so consumed with their thought of being free that they forgot about that. And they forgot about being enslaved to sin. And that was what Jesus was talking about. And what in the world does it have to do with that cartoon about Tom and Jerry and the white whale? And I think it's this. When Jesus talks about being free, he talks about what we live our life for. What do you live your life for? Because whatever you live your life for is your master. Do you understand what I mean when I say that? Let's say that you live for fishing. Anybody here love fishing? A couple of folks, some kids, they got the hand, love fishing. But say you lived for fishing. What would you do in the midst of your daily life? What would you do? You'd fish, right? And when you went to the store, where would be the first place you would go? The fishing aisle, right? And you'd spend hours on that. And not only would you spend hours, you'd spend a lot of money on it too, right? And you'd probably have, if you could afford the boat, you'd have the boat, you'd have all the latest gear, you'd have all that stuff. Your life would be consumed with fishing. And what would happen if all of a sudden it was a day that you couldn't fish? What would that make you feel? It would make you pretty upset, wouldn't it? You wouldn't like it. You would rail against the day. If it was raining and you wanted to be out there fishing, you'd rail against it. You'd be angry with it. You couldn't wait to get out there. You needed to be out there. You wanted to be fishing all the time. Is it because you like to fish, or is it because your life is now controlled by the fishing? Think about that for just a second. What do you think it is? If you live your life for something, that something will eventually control you. It will master you. It will enslave you. And see, that's what happened to Martin Luther all those years ago. He was enslaved by living for salvation. He wanted to be saved. When he died, he wanted the assurance that he would go to heaven. And that was the thing that drove him for the part of his life when he stopped studying to be a lawyer and the time he became a monk before he became a professor of theology. He wanted to be saved, he wanted to have salvation, and he threw himself into trying to figure out how he would be saved. And the church at the time taught him that he had to do good works. On the cosmic scale of good or bad, he figured he had to have too much good that would outweigh the bad so that he would end up with salvation. And so he threw himself into doing good things. He threw himself into the things that made him what the church thought would make him what the church told him would be good. He became a monk. He washed the floors. He scraped by. He hurt himself. He spent tons of time in prayer and confession. He did all of these things because he was consumed with the idea of being saved. And he found himself trapped. He found himself enslaved to that idea because he knew that God demanded him to love him. He demanded that Luther love him with all his heart, soul, mind, and strength. But the more he was trying to be a slave to salvation, the more he was trying to be good, the more he felt God was a slave driver, a master who was unrelenting, a master who could never love him because Luther didn't love him with his whole heart. And Luther found himself trapped. How can I love a God that demands perfection out of me? How can I love a God when I want salvation so badly, and the only way to get that salvation is to be perfect? Luther ended up in despair. Until he started reading. Until he started reading the Bible. And he read the book of Psalms. And he read the book of Romans. And he came upon that passage that we read today. That passage that said, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Luther knew that. He knew that he had sinned. He knew that he had fallen short of the glory of God. He knew that he wasn't there. And so those words resonated deeply within him. And then he saw that we are now justified by grace through faith as a gift, through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus, whom God set forward to be a sacrifice of atonement effective through faith. And Luther read those words and he said, wait a minute here. I'm made right with God, not with what I do. But I am made right with God because of what God has done through Jesus Christ. I'm made right with God because Jesus went to the cross to be the sacrifice of atonement, to bury my sin. I am right with God because of God's action and not my own. I have salvation through Jesus Christ. I'm saved through Him. I don't have to strive for it because it's been given to me as a gift. All I have to do is trust in Jesus. Trust in His action and not my own, and I'm guaranteed a spot in heaven. And for Luther, that was a huge moment because everything that he had been striving for was suddenly given to him. when he trusted in Jesus. His life was now filled. His heart was now full. He didn't feel like he had to accomplish anything any longer because it had already been done for him. And he found freedom. His deepest heart's desire had been satisfied. My brothers and sisters in Christ, if your deepest heart's desire is suddenly satisfied, what would you feel? What would you sense if your deepest heart's desire was taken care of? What would you feel? Would you feel elated? Would you feel joyful? Would you feel overrun with happiness? Would you feel free? That's what Luther felt. He was overjoyed. And he began proclaiming that news to the rest of the world. A rest of the world that he felt needed to hear it. He pinned those 95 Theses on the door of the church in Wittenberg, Germany. It started a spark. It started fighting. It started conflict. Because there are certain forces in this world that don't want us to be free. But Luther stood fast and held his ground. Because he said, this is worth fighting for. This is what we are here for as the church. We are here to announce the news that God has acted in human history through the person of Jesus Christ to bring us freedom. Not freedom from all the rules and regulations in society. We still have to follow those. But freedom within the depths of our very heart and soul. Freedom to say, you know what? Your deepest heart's desire, if your deepest heart's desire is anything else than Jesus, you're going to find yourself in bondage. But if you turn to Jesus Christ, if you make Him the object of your deepest heart's desire, He will fill you. You will find Him. You will find salvation. You will find peace. You will find joy. You will find hope. And you will know that God is in charge of your life. And He will work in your life to bring you to the place where He needs you to be. Doesn't mean there won't be rocks in the road. It doesn't mean that there won't be times of trial and tribulation. But God will take your life and bring you to the fullness of salvation that is within Him. I have one church member who tells me time and time again, Pastor, you need to tell people God has a plan for your life, and that plan is going to be good. I'm saying that right now. Because when your heart's desire is for God, He will take your life and He will bring it toward His good, no matter what you go through. And so in the midst of the storm, in the midst of, if you love fishing and it's raining outside and you can't get out there, you can say, there's another day. And I don't have to get upset with it. If your heart's desire is to watch the Cowboys win the Super Bowl, you can still be patient even though you're going to be disappointed. I'm a Cowboys fan. I can rail on myself. But it won't be an all-consuming deal. You won't get mad and run your fist through a wall because the Cowboys lose. If your deepest heart's desire is Jesus, everything in your life will fall into perspective. And you will have a different view of the world. And that's why Jesus says today, continue in my word, for you will be my disciple. You will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. That's the story of the Reformation. It's our story. It's what we celebrate today. My brothers and sisters, if you don't feel free yet, turn your heart to Jesus. Make him your deepest heart's desire. And he will fill you. You will be filled with joy. You will be filled with hope. You will be filled with peace. And that is what we celebrate today. And I invite you now to stand as you are able, as we indeed celebrate, and sing what is called oftentimes the battle hymn of the Reformation, "A Mighty Fortress is Our God."